How is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we check into uh, all kinds of information, theories, concepts, and discoveries that you're probably not familiar with because they've been suppressed. But if you do become familiar, they will accentuate your life in countless ways, but especially in improving your mental, spiritual, and physical health. And this is a segment we have called Bible Decode. This is number 455. And so these are the things that your priest or pastor will not answer, doesn't know about probably, and maybe even chided you for even asking. And we focus mostly on the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, and that is that the Romans are the true authors of the New Testament, written as a psychological operation against the Jews. Um, this is exactly what the Romans did do in other situations. They created a number of other religions for propagandistic purposes. But the Jews were a special group for them because they were the most high maintenance nation within their empire. And they were constantly revolting and insurrecting and uprising. And the Romans had a vested interest in putting them down, mellowing them out, taming or domesticating them, getting them to get with the program. And this culminated in a flat out war that broke out in Jerusalem in 66 AD. And um, the two main Roman generals who prosecuted that war, Vespasian and Titus, his son Titus, they eventually became the new emperors, the Flavian emperors, starting in 69 AD. It took the Romans 7 years to put down that war. And after it was over, they reached into their bag of strategy, into their bag of psychological operations, and decided to create a religion for um, the consumption of the Messianic Jews who had fomented that revolution, and instead gave them a story, a heroic story of Jesus, a um, Messiah, Jewish Messiah, who instead was a Prince of Peace, not a military commander, not somebody that was going to organize the Jews against the Romans, but instead totally deferential to the Romans and actually against the Jews, believing in turning the other cheek and rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking the extra mile, and at the same time um, calling the Jews a generation of vipers and um, overturning the tables of the money changers at the outskirts of the temple, uh, castigating the Jewish merchants for selling small animals at the temple for sacrifice, and imploring his disciples to abandon their families in order to follow him. And um, so this is a tailor made Jesus for the Romans. And then as we move further along in the New Testament, we see that Paul is even more tailor made to the Romans than Jesus was, to the point where um, Thies Voskuilen and Rosemary Sheldon have actually written a book called Operation Messiah, where they accuse Paul of being a a double agent, a spy against the Jews on the side of the Romans, because every place that Paul goes, basically he starts a riot among the Jews, and the Romans have to save him. Uh, 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 so um, they are not correct because they didn't understand that Paul never existed and that he was a psychological operation. But he performs exactly as if he were a Roman spy because he is a Roman character in a story that is a psychological operation. Now, when the Romans created the stories in the New Testament, they borrowed liberally from everything that they could get their hands on. All the earlier pagan sources from Egypt, India, China, Japan, Persia, and also Greece and Rome. They also borrowed heavily from the Jewish tradition and from the pagan mystery schools, astrology, numerology, um, shamanism, magic, also from the Sumerians, and maybe even a few more exotic groups such as the Pygmies and even the Mexicans. And they put it all together, cobbled it together into the Gospels. Now, when they also wrote the Gospels, they also created another character, which was called Satan. Now, Satan appears in the Word, appears in the Old Testament, but rarely, just a handful of times. And each time it refers to a human, an obstacle or an adversary. But this new Satan in the New Testament is one of um, supernatural proportions. This is an all powerful Satan, one that can damn you to hell for eternity, or at least to um, enforce your uh, sentence to hell for eternity, and that can tempt you uh, omnipresently. Just wherever you go, Satan is there. And so this is a different quality of Satan. And it also then becomes amplified over the years by Western art and literature, especially Dante and Milton, but especially Hollywood. Um, the movie industry, the cartoon industry have really given us the our image, our images of Satan, and but nonetheless, it is entirely fictional, and there is no Satan. There are Satanists, um, just like there are Christians. There is no Jesus. There are Christians. There is no Satan, and there are Satanists. And as a matter of fact, if the Christians didn't exist, the Satanists wouldn't exist because most people are interested in Satanism because they hate Christians. But anyway, we're looking and hopefully getting toward the end of a book here by Kersey Graves called Biography of Satan. And he goes into the history and the origins of Satan. Now we are in this book was written back in 1865, so that needs to be kept in mind. But we're in the last chapter here, I believe, chapter 17. And he goes over an endless list of questions. Some might call it wise ass questions that he asks about for a Christian about who Satan is, and you know, if Satan existed, then what would you answer about this, and so on. We're about to start question number 42. Would he not have to move in his giddy rounds with the celerity of the telegraph to make calls but once per annum upon each son and daughter of Adam, leaving him scarcely time as he hauls up to the humble domicile or gorgeous palace of each to bow and scrape with a "How do you do, sir? Glad to see you." Or are we to assume, in order to dispose of this difficulty, that as nothing is impossible with God, so nothing is impossible with the devil? 44. Or if the difficulty is attempted to be surmounted by supposing and assuming that his satanic honor is supplied with a numerous retinue of subaltern imps or pygmy demons to aid him in his maleficent enterprise, we ask whether he would not, in that case, have to engross all his time in drilling, training, and posting these auxiliary or subsidiary functionaries in their new vocation of soul catching, and whether this would leave him any time to eat and sleep or even to rest upon the Sabbath. We would likewise query whether in high latitudes or in northern climates, say in the polar regions, if any of the hobgoblin board of soul catching demons should venture out from their intensely caloric, fiery dominions while the thermometer is perhaps ranging at 50 or 75 degrees below zero, stiffened limbs, a bad cold, and mayhap still more serious, if not fatal, consequences might not ensue. And should we not calculate on the danger of some reprobate souls foreordained to destruction, making their escape into paradise on these occasions of their demon pursuers being inevitably retarded by their operations by the weather? Ought not God to be very thankful to old Harry Holloway for taking the punishment of the wicked off his hands, since he has declared the wicked shall not go unpunished, and hence would have to punish them himself if the devil did not? And since we learn that God has decreed that the wicked shall be punished in hell, and the devil is this agent in performing the needful work, must we not therefore consider his snakish majesty as a truly faithful servant of the Lord and a co worker with him? Or, if the punishment of the wicked is to be set down as the devil's doings exclusively, and yet God assents to it by permitting him to exist and achieve his hellish work, then he is not acting in conformity with God's will, and hence performing his duty. And does it not thence follow also that it is God and not the devil who punishes the wicked, the latter only being an agent? On the other hand, if we assume that God is really opposed to the devil's operations and machinations, then does it not follow that his diabolical majesty holds the supreme sway and compels God Almighty to hold a subordinate rank under him and to be a kind of secondary omnipotence? And does not this follow from another assumption, that is, that the devil's broad road into which so many go in thereat is much more thronged than the narrow way that leadeth unto life? And may we not ask if it was not labor lost to make a house of many mansions, seeing so few tenants find their way to it or are allowed to enter it? May we not also consider the Christian plan of salvation a kind of lottery system or scheme in which God and the devil are the ticket holders, the wicked constituting the ballots? And is it not the teachings of the Holy Writ that his infernal or satanic omnipotence drew Mother Eve as the first prize? And since that bit of good luck, has he not drawn the major portion of the small fry, a much larger share than the Creator himself? If the devil, after the curtailment of his ubiquity or of his infinite power, as taught in Revelation 6:8, and after God had declared all souls are mine, still managed to decoy most of them into his fiery domicile, how many souls do we suppose he would have left for God if his power had not been curtailed? If most God's heritage travel from the broad road which leadeth unto destruction, as the Holy Scriptures inform us, then are we not to suppose there are rooms to let in the house of many mansions? Is it not strange that if the wicked are to be punished eternally in hell, as declared in Matthew 25:46, that God should speak of the destruction of hell in Hosea 12:14? The destruction of hell. How can the wicked be punished after they are destroyed, as taught in Matthew 21:41? Or how long can they continue to exist after being destroyed? How can the souls of the wicked burn forever, as in Matthew 18:8, without being consumed, since it is the nature of fire to reduce all combustible substances to ashes? Would it not be a great acquisition in chemical art to find a substance that would thus burn forever without being consumed, especially if it could be used for culinary purposes in countries where fuel is scarce? Do we not make God 1,000 times worse and more fiendish than the wickedest of his creatures when we talk of his punishing any being forever? And do we not invest him with an inhuman, brutal, and savage character, which the most bloodthirsty tyrant who ever drenched the earth in human blood would spurn to own? For where in all history can the name of a demon hearted villain be found who would burn an enemy even a week, not to mention an eternity? Then which is the worse to believe, such a libel on the character of God, or to believe the writer mistaken who assigns him such a character, even though said writer may claim to be inspired? Is not Lee Hunt right when he says, if an angel were to tell me to believe in eternal punishment, I would not do it, for it would be better become me to believe the angel a delusion than God monstrous, as we make him by considering him the author of eternal punishment. How could a being who is perfectly good and kind hearted punish one of his creatures without mentally, if not physically, punishing himself, and thus himself suffer eternal misery and torment by such an act? And is it not the climax of absurdity thus to assume that God would or could punish himself in this manner? Or could a God with one spark of sympathy, justice, or mercy punish a being a year, a month, or even a day, to say nothing of eternity? Would there be any sense in punishing a being for any other purpose than to reform him or make an example for others? Would it not be impossible for post-mortem punishment to serve either of these ends? Could a just God punish one of his creatures for acting out the impulses of that nature which he sees himself, which he himself has endowed him with? And does not every human being do this? When God, according to the Bible, saw that the greater portion of mankind were going to destruction and creation proved a failure, why did he not knock the whole thing into pi and try it over again or give it up for a bad job? Is it not strange that an almighty and omnipotent God who wills that all men should be saved could not hit on some plan by which all could be saved? Did God foresee man's proclivity to damnation and destruction? If not, how could he be omniscient or a God at all? But presuming that he did foresee it and was unable to see this fatal tendency to ruin, should he not have refrained from bringing him into existence? Must we not consider it a cruel act to bring him into existence under such circumstances? And could any being possessing a spark of feeling or sensibility, whether he be God or man, be happy for a moment with the consciousness that one single soul was suffering the woeful torments of hell? Okay, I think we're going to stop right there. Uh, we're about halfway through this list, so we'll continue that tomorrow when we return. For today, that will do it. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. Share this out. There are a lot of people out there that need to hear this message. Um, Truthers and diggers and patriots, especially, um, who have the stomach and appetite to do the digging, but I don't believe they've been exposed to these ideas in all of their years. And so send it to your favorite Christian. And otherwise, thanks for tuning in today and have a great day.